Well, thanks very much for having me here. I really appreciate the chance to talk to the Boilermakers. I'm kind of a closet Boilermaker, as you'll see in some of the slides that follow here. So, really great opportunity for me. I have one sort of cardinal rule when I'm speaking: the bigger the crowd, the faster I talk. So I'm pretty sure I won't put any of you to sleep during the process here. I'm going to talk about what we did at the Sturgeon refinery and why we're doing it, and I'll just get started now. So first thing I want to say is everything everybody in this room does makes lots of CO2. And the world's decided CO2 is bad, and if we don't do something about it, we're all going to go out of business. So we have to figure out what to do with it, and if we just sit back and wait for it to happen, bad things are going to happen to us. So we're building the Sturgeon refinery. It's up by Edmonton. You've already heard this story better than I can tell it. It's about a 2,000-acre site. Today we have about 6,000 people on it. We are far advanced in construction. We spent about $6 billion out of $8.5, 3 identical phases, so it's be $25 billion by the time we're done. And I'm lucky enough to be the guy that had a clean sheet of paper and an unsharpened pencil and got to be able to do this. So, my life is about building stuff, and this is as good as it gets for me. We've got about 140 cranes on the site right now. It's really an active thing. We've installed about 800 of 1,050 modules, so it's going pretty good. And we think productivity on the site's good, safety is good, and we're pleased to be getting there. So I use this picture because I've been working on this thing 12 years now, and this is the way I used to look before I started doing it. So I'm going to bore you with a little bit of my story about how I got there, because people ask you, what do you need to do, what do you need to know to be able to build a refinery? And the truth is, not very much, but not what you think. So my family's worked in the oil fields forever. My great-grandfather came from Iowa in 1905, and there's a place in Alberta where we found the first oil field in 1914. It's called Turner Valley. So the guy with the red arrow there is my great-grandfather. My dad worked in a machine shop. There was a local oil field machine shop called Barber Industries, or Barbers, and they did all the oil field work. And my dad got the idea, so I'm the first person in my family to go to university. I don't know what's going on. Yeah, so that's me when I was in university. I put the glasses on though. So I'm the first person in my family to go to university. I was good at fixing cars, and so we thought, well, that was mechanical engineering. That's how much we knew about going to university. When I went, my dad got the idea I could be the night watchman in the machine shop. I could go to school during the day, sleep in the afternoons, and then night watchman at night. So for 4 years, I worked in the machine shop as a night watchman. I hate studying, and so I learned how to run every machine in the place, and I can, do stuff. So I got out. Either I couldn't get a job or didn't want to get one, so I rented a double garage and started building little machines. This is a check writing machine that was the first thing I started with. I built a lot of other stuff, ended up with a decent-sized shop, had a couple of hundred, between 200 and 300 people working in it. We tried to build windmills, but we couldn't get the economics to work, so we just built one. But the shop was really building anything for the oil field, so gas plants, refineries, pressure vessels, we build anything. And we had something called the National Energy Program in Canada, and that was when the government tried to take over the oil business. So we went broke when that was going on, as did many other people in Alberta. The story for me was the last meeting I go to the bank, and the guy says, how are you going to pay us back? And I said, well, I can't. And he said, well, what are you going to do about it? I said, well, not much. There's nothing I can do. He says, how are you getting home from the meeting? I says, well, I'll go down and drive my car. He says, no, it's our car. so I had to take the bus home from the last meeting with the bank. So I started over again building really small gas plants because we knew how to do that. We changed the business, so instead of building them as a contractor, we would build them and we'd try and buy really crappy oil reserves and put a little gas plant on them. So we started doing this, worked okay. Bought that thing, it was broken, so we don't have to build it new, we can fix stuff too. So this was really broken. It was the 4th largest gas plant in Canada when we bought it. The guys who were running it were not very good, and we were able to make it a lot better. Today it's about a 750 million a day plant, and it produces about 40,000 barrels of natural gas liquids. So So after I did that, then I did a bunch of other stuff, always building things. I bought the rig on the left there. It was the largest deep water rig in the world when I bought it. It was down in Pascagoula, Mississippi. The guys building it were sort of teetering on bankruptcy, and the shipyard building it went broke. So I went and bought it when it was partially complete, dragged it up to Halifax, completed the construction of it, and then formed a new drilling contractor and drilled for a couple of years off the East Coast. And then I sold it back to the guys I bought it off because they were fluffed up enough to afford it again by then. The thing on the top right there is a pipeline business I started. It had a decent-sized pipeline contractor, would have had about 800 people working in it, and I sold it off. And then CalFrac is a well fracking outfit that I was involved in the early phases of. There. Oh. So this is the Weyburn CO2 flood. So Weyburn's in Saskatchewan. We always call it Weyburn. But the CO2 comes from a coal gasification plant down in Beulah, North Dakota. And so if you're old enough, probably some of you worked on it. It was built in the 80s under a DOE program. When gas was getting short, they thought they'd make coal into gas. So we collect the CO2 from that plant. It's about a 175 mile long pipeline. Brings it up to Weyburn, and then put the CO2 in the ground. And so I owned about 11% of that when no one could figure out what it was, and I thought this is going to be a really cool thing. So that was the experience I got doing CO2 stuff. So 2002, I sold everything. I said I'm going to retire, you know, and do whatever retired people do. I don't know how to golf, never learned how to do that. So it was a pretty limited range of hobbies. Anyway, I got bored pretty quick, and my wife really got bored having me around, so essentially I had to figure out something else new to do. And, sorry, I'm not very good. Oh, there it is, okay. So I got this idea. I was getting, you know, I thought that we could produce reliable, low carbon energy from oil. I thought all this stuff about windmills and solar panels and all that stuff. When I went into the numbers, I don't believe them. I don't think they're as robust as everybody thinks they are. And I think they all need backup capacity from somewhere, and that's probably coming from a coal plant or a gas-fired power plant. So anyway, I wanted to do stuff with oil. So I had this idea on the top left. I thought, take oil, we got lots of oil in Alberta, put it in a refinery, make it into diesel fuel, sell something to the Chinese for a change, take the CO2 that comes out of the refining process and use it for enhanced oil recovery. And the refining process is essentially taking a long chain molecule, cutting it up into little pieces, and putting hydrogen on the end. So every refinery, and pretty well every chemical process, involves hydrogen of some form. When you make hydrogen, if you make a molecule of hydrogen, you make a molecule of CO2 at the same time. So anybody that's doing any process stuff is making a lot of CO2. And I felt that was an opportunity because these big single point sources are something you got to hope of doing something with. So started two businesses at the same time, Northwest Refining and Enhance Energy. They're different businesses, different shareholders, but I'm the common theme. This is the refinery. You've seen other shots. It's a big site. We got 2,000 acres there. It's conceived as 3 identical phases. I know you're all rolling your eyes when you say that. It really is going to be 3 identical phases. We're not going to make any changes. We'll fix it if it doesn't work. So we're trying to make it so that we have the opportunity to build the same thing over and over again, and that's a way for us to get rid of some engineering costs and do it better. There's just a bunch of shots in here that I'll show you, if the slide works. Yeah. So no one knows what $1 billion is, and for sure no one knows what 8.5 is when you start this. So I started trying to figure out, well, what does an $8 billion project look like? So I looked through all the big projects I could find, and the only thing that I could find that was about equivalent to it was the Panama Canal. When they finished the Panama Canal in 1914, it cost $375 million. So if you inflate that to 2014, you're about $8 billion. So what we're building up there is kind of the economic equivalent of the Panama Canal, and we plan to build 3 of them, so we think pretty cool thing. These are just different shots in the, so it's coming along good. It's really a dense thing. We tried to compact it in the mistaken belief that was going to save money. Anyway, it's a compact refinery. Gasification is the heart of this plant, and it allows us to take the bottom of the barrel. So there's 2 paths to refining. One is coking, I take carbon out. The other one is hydrocracking, I leave carbon in, but I end up with something that's really heavy, part of the bottom of the barrel. And a gasifier allows you to convert that heavy bottom into CO2 and hydrogen. So we selected gasification because we didn't want to make coke. We think that's the wrong thing for the future. It's going to be a disposal product, and in our oil sands, we have high sulfur and high metals, and they end up in the coke, so it's really bad stuff. So we felt we didn't want to do that, so we put in a gasifier. The good part of the gasifier is pure CO2 comes out of it. So we can use that for something. So these are just shots of the gasifier. Those are the reactors in it. It's from a German licensor called Lurgi, who was bought by Air Liquide, but they've been doing this since forever. That's where it goes. It's further behind than every other part of the plant, and we're just getting the modules for it now, so they're the last modules to be installed, so that's why the site looks like a baseball field there. And that's another shot from the other side. So this is the way the stuff comes to the site. I'm sure most of you have seen it before, but we've got 1,050 of these things coming to the site. They're about 30 feet by 30 feet by about 105 to 125 feet long. And we bring them to the site and then put them together like Lego. So really interesting thing about refining is you get a lot of CO2. And so CO2, well, refining and enhanced oil recovery using CO2 are logical things to do together. And it hasn't been done much, but it needs to be done in the future. So the top, so this is, the green bar on there is something that I made up, but the top two bars are bars that the Department of Energy did. And so the top bar, they looked at it and they said, for our oil sands, when you make bitumen into diesel fuel and burn it in your car, how much CO2 does that whole process make? And that's the red bar. And then the blue bar is, what is the average US refinery, the crude slate that it's running on, how much CO2 does it produce? So the red bar, we're bad, we're gonna be in the penalty box forever. Blue bar, that's what we gotta compare ourselves to. And the green bar is if you capture the CO2 from the refining process in the way that we are. So we end up being about 7% less CO2 intensive than the average US crude slate. So that's almost a 30% improvement in our CO2 profile from the thing. So this is a little video on Enhance, which is doing the CO2 part of it. So they come from our refinery, and they also collect CO2 from a fertilizer plant that's across the street and move it down into central Alberta. We decided we had to do the whole thing. We couldn't rely on somebody else to do it. So we bought the oil fields on the end, we're building the pipeline, and we're collecting the CO2. It's about a 150 kilometer pipeline. It is 16-inch. And it will be able to move about 10 times the capacity that we need for our refinery. So we think other people are going to connect to this in the fullness of time. And the places we're putting the CO2 have been there for 30 million years under pressure. So these reservoirs, we know they're going to be pressure containers because Mother Nature has been testing them for 30 million years. So we put it down there, and it does two things. It reduces the viscosity of the oil in the formation, and it makes the oil swell a bit. And so the oil wants to come out. So this is oil that's stuck in the formation. The blue things are CO2, and the brown blobs are oil. And it just kind of chases it out. A bit of the CO2 comes back in the oil. We separate that out and recycle it. So I'll just finish off that slide by saying, we can go back to an old oil reservoir that it starts off with 100 barrels of oil in it. You drill and produce it under conventional techniques, and you can get about 50 of those barrels out. And the last 50 are stuck in the reservoir. They won't come out unless you put CO2 in. If you put CO2 in, you can get about 25 of the 50 barrels remaining in the reservoir out. And the beauty of this is the oil pays for all the costs of doing it. You know, all the other CCS projects, I'm trying to find a cheap garbage dump and I'm trying to get rid of the CO2, but it's going to cost something. When you do it this way, the oil pays to dispose of the CO2. So this slide is all of the CCS projects that we know about in the world, and the size of the circle is the size of the project, but it's also the number of jobs that we're going to create for Boilermakers. So when you see big circles, those are good. Most of them are in North America. There should be a hell of a lot more. These aren't very many circles, and we can do this if we keep working on it. Our circle is the biggest one. So there has been a very large industry in the United States using CO2 for enhanced oil recovery, and today something like 375,000 barrels a day of oil is coming out of the ground using CO2. But in Texas, you can drill a well and you're going to find pure CO2 in some of them. So you take that CO2 out of the ground, build a little piece of pipe and put it down in a reservoir, and that oil comes out. The future is going to be using man-made CO2, not formation CO2 for EOR. The amount of CO2 that's currently being injected in the US is equivalent to 50 refineries like ours, so it's a lot. So these are just some statistics, really interesting thing. They've put 1 billion tons of CO2 in the ground already. So the International Energy Agency again looked at it and said, how much CO2 do I have to put in the ground to meet the 2-degree climate change goal? And that's the green bar on the left. And then they said, what's the worldwide EOR potential? And that's the blue bar on the right. So you can meet the 2-degree climate change goal by putting CO2 in the ground for enhanced oil recovery. So we think as this evolves, that's going to be an economic thing to do. 3 things you need to do. First of all, you got to have a place to put it. Second thing, it's got to be pure. You can't make combustion CO2. You got to clean it up so that it's high purity CO2. And the third thing you need are pipelines to move it around. The shale revolution has created lots of places to put the CO2. So it's just starting to happen now. We're all hearing about how oil production goes up. Well, the spaces that are left behind from that oil are many of those places you're going to be able to put CO2 in. And some of them are in good places where there hasn't been an opportunity to do this before. So EOR is all concentrated in Texas, but now we're going to be able to do it in lots of other places. Everybody is making pure CO2 right now. So people talk about how do you do this? The plant on the left is the Agrium fertilizer complex across the street from us. So it uses a reformer to make hydrogen for the fertilizer process. It's CO2 we're capturing. The plant on the right is the Boundary Dam in Saskatchewan. They're cleaning up CO2 out of a coal plant combustion stream. They had problems starting it up, but it's working now. The one on the bottom left is the Shell Quest project. They've gone back and retrofitted a reformer to clean up that CO2 stream, and then we're on the right. So these are real projects in real operation. This isn't somebody, making up a science project. Pipelines, no problem. They're easy, except unless they're Keystone pipelines are really easy. So I believe low CO2 is happening, but it's happening way too slowly for the people in this room. If we don't get going, it's going to be bad. So what happens if we don't act? We get that. People shut these things down, they're too high carbon, they give up and they take them down and then you can't replace them. These guys don't own calculators. And so publicity beats science. If you're not meeting them with publicity, you're going to lose. This is my view of the world. Get lots of pretty pictures on the left, eat a bunch of jobs, and everybody pays for it. You don't get such great pictures on the right, but you get lots of jobs, and the numbers work. So what I think is needed is everybody in this room, everybody who works on this stuff, to get together and say, look, we got to find all the sources, we got to find all the places we can put them. We got to have fair regulatory guidelines, so you get a 2 cent a kilowatt hour production credit when you put up a windmill. But if you achieve the same carbon objective, saving carbon out of a coal plant, you don't get it. And something's wrong with that movie to me. There needs to be broad general education on this topic. No one knows anything about it. They need to understand and know what can be done. It needs some funding from everybody. And finally, we got to mobilize people. Like there are people that are they're getting their plants shut down. They're just sitting around waiting. So you guys are the logical leaders because you're on every project. You got the most to lose. You know all the owners and you're organized. That's what we risk if we don't do it. So I don't want to be part of that. Thank you.